Hey everybody, welcome back to Barter Hordes. My name is Robert. Happy Friday. Just as I did last week, since I'm in the middle of reading for the judging of the quarterfinals for the BOOKTUBE prize, and I can't really talk too much about the books that I'm reading until the round is over. Last week I gave you a rundown on some of the recent translated fiction titles I've received from publishers for consideration for next year's BOOKTUBE prize. I'm going to continue with that idea this week with the stack of recent nonfiction titles I've received. And then next week on my Friday Reads, I'll finish up this little segment with the stack of fiction that I've received recently. But let me tell you what I have been reading. I have finished 2 and 98% of a third title this week, which wraps up my fiction group commitment. The 3 that I've read this week are Emma Donohue's The Pull of the Stars, and then I read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and by the time this video gets posted, I will have finished Brandon Taylor's Real Life. So finishing up the 6 novels that are in this group, I needed to read 3 more of those. That leaves me 4 more books to read for the quarterfinals round that I'm judging in nonfiction. And the one I'll be starting next is the second largest one. I've already finished the big one, Red Comet, but now I'm going to attack Barack Obama's A Promised Land, which is the next longest one. And then I'll finish up this month with the 3 shorter ones that I still have left. So my reading is going well. I'm staying on schedule. I'm actually a little ahead of schedule, so in case something happens and I miss a day, I'll be fine. But it's been busy. As I mentioned last week, I have Fevers, Feuds, and Diamonds by Paul Farmer kind of on the back burner. I'm not really getting to that right now. I'll pick that back up once I finish my judging commitment reading. And I'm picking up a little bit of The Progress of Love by Alice Munro each day, because that's this month's Barter Hordes Backlist Book Club selection. If you're following along with the Barter Hordes Backlist, our June selection is Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina, a book I've never read before, so that's going to be a new one for me too. So that's what I've been reading. Let's jump into the stack of nonfiction, because it's a pretty sizable stack. And if you stick with me to the end, I'll update you quickly on my K-drama watching and on my cycling, and we'll go from there. The first one is a collection of essays called Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing by Lauren Hough. I realize that this author has generated some controversy on social media recently, and I'm not going to comment on that here. I stay neutral on things like that when it concerns books that are nominated for the BOOKTUBE prize. But the reviews for this one were good before the controversy, and so it got included in the field, at least as a nomination. Searing and extremely personal essays from the heart of working-class America, shot through with the darkest elements the country can manifest, cults, homelessness, and hunger, while discovering light and humor in unexpected corners. At once razor-sharp, profoundly brave, and often very funny, the essays in Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing interrogate our notions of ecstasy, queerness, and what it means to live freely. Each piece is a reckoning of survival, identity, and how to reclaim one's past when carving out a future. The next one, and these are in no particular order, they just happen to be in the order they are in my stack. I didn't try to rank them or prioritize them or group them in any way. They're just in random order. The next one is Beloved Beasts, Fighting for Life in an Age of Extinction by Michelle Nijhuis. A vibrant history of the modern conservation movement told through the lives and ideas of the people who built it. As the destruction of other species continues and the effects of climate change escalate, Beloved Beasts charts the ways conservation is becoming a movement for the protection of all species, including our own. The next one is called Girlhood by Melissa Febos. A gripping set of stories about the forces that shape girls and the adults they become. A wise and brilliant guide to transforming the self and our society. In her powerful new book, critically acclaimed author Melissa Febos examines the narratives women are told about what it means to be female and what it takes to free oneself from them. Blending investigative reporting, memoir, and scholarship, Febos charts how she and others like her have reimagined relationships and made room for the anger, grief, power, and pleasure women have long been taught to deny. Written with Febos' characteristic precision, lyricism, and insight, Girlhood is a philosophical treatise, an anthem for women, and a searing study of the transitions into and away from girlhood toward a chosen self. The next one is called Life's Edge, The Search for What It Means to Be Alive by Carl Zimmer. We all assume we know what life is, but the more scientists learn about the living world, from protocells to brains, from zygotes to pandemic viruses, the harder they find it is to locate life's edge. Carl Zimmer investigates one of the biggest questions of all: what is life? The answer seems obvious until you try to seriously answer it. Is the apple sitting on your kitchen counter alive? Or is only the apple tree it came from deserving of the word? If we can't answer that question here on Earth, how will we know when and if we discover alien life on other worlds? The question hangs over some of society's most charged conflicts, whether a fertilized egg is a living person, for example, and when we ought to declare a person legally dead. Charting the obsession with Dr. Frankenstein's monster and how Coleridge came to believe the whole universe was alive, Zimmer leads us all the way into the labs and minds of researchers working on engineering life from the ground up. The next one is a collection of essays from 2000 to 2020 called The Hard Crowd by Rachel Kushner. Rachel Kushner has established herself as a master of the essay form. In The Hard Crowd, she gathers a selection of her writing from over the course of the last 20 years that addresses the most pressing political, artistic, and cultural issues of our times, and illuminates the themes and real-life terrain that underpin her fiction. In 19 razor-sharp essays, The Hard Crowd spans literary journalism, memoir, cultural criticism, and writing about art and literature, including pieces on Jeff Koons, Dennis Johnson, and Marguerite Duras. Kushner takes us on a journey through a Palestinian refugee camp, an illegal motorcycle race down the Baja Peninsula, 1970s wildcat strikes in Fiat factories, her love of classic cars, and her young life in the music scene of her hometown, San Francisco. The closing eponymous essay is her manifesto on nostalgia, doom, and writing. These pieces, new and old, are electric, phosphorescently vivid, and wry, and they provide an opportunity to witness the evolution and range of one of our most dazzling and fearless writers. The next one is called Nobody's Normal: How Culture Created the Stigma of Mental Illness by Roy Richard Grinker. For centuries, scientists and society cast moral judgments on anyone deemed mentally ill, confining many to asylums. In Nobody's Normal, anthropologist Roy Richard Grinker chronicles the progress and setbacks in the struggle against mental illness stigma from the 18th century through America's major wars and into today's high-tech economy. Grinker infuses the book with the personal history of his family's 4 generations of involvement in psychiatry, including his grandfather's analysis with Sigmund Freud, his own daughter's experience with autism, and culminating in his research on neurodiversity. Drawing on cutting-edge science, historical archives, and cross-cultural research in Africa and Asia, Nobody's Normal explains how we are transforming mental illness and offers a path to end the shadow of stigma. The next one is called A World on the Wing, The Global Odyssey of Migratory Birds by Scott Weidensaul. In the past 2 decades, our understanding of the navigational and physiological feats that enable birds to cross immense oceans, fly above the highest mountains, or remain in unbroken flight for months at a stretch has exploded. What we've learned of these key migrations, how billions of birds circumnavigate the globe, flying tens of thousands of miles between hemispheres on an annual basis, is nothing short of extraordinary. Bird migration entails almost unfathomable endurance, like a sparrow-sized sandpiper that will fly nonstop from Canada to Venezuela, the equivalent of running 126 consecutive marathons without food, water, or rest, avoiding dehydration by drinking moisture from its own muscles and organs, while orienting itself using the Earth's magnetic field through a form of quantum entanglement that made Einstein queasy. Crossing the Pacific Ocean in 9 days of nonstop flight, as some birds do, leaves little time for sleep. But migrants can put half their brains to sleep for a few seconds at a time, alternating sides, and their reaction time actually improves. These and other revelations convey both the wonder of bird migration and its global sweep, from the mudflats of the Yellow Sea in China to the remote mountains of northeastern India to the dusty hills of southern Cyprus. This breathtaking work of nature writing from Pulitzer Prize finalist Scott Weidensaul also introduces readers to those scientists, researchers, and bird lovers trying to preserve global migratory patterns in the face of climate change and other environmental challenges. The next one is called The Black Church. This is Our Story, This is Our Song by Henry Louis Gates, Jr. From the New York Times bestselling author of Stony the Road and one of our most important voices on the African American experience, a powerful new history of the Black church in America as the Black community's abiding rock and its fortress. As Gates brilliantly shows, the Black church has never been only one thing. Its story lies at the vital center of the civil rights movement and produced many of its leaders, from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. on. But at the same time, there have always been churches and sects that eschewed a more activist stance, even eschewed worldly political engagement altogether. That tension can be felt all the way to the Black Lives Matter movement and the work of today. Still and all, as a source of strength and a force for change, the Black church is at the center of the action at every stage of the American story, as this enthralling history makes vividly clear. And apparently this is a companion volume to a PBS series. The next one is a biography of George Washington, The Political Rise of America's Founding Father by David O. Stewart. Washington's rise constitutes one of the greatest self-reinventions in history. In his mid-20s, this third son of a modest Virginia planter had ruined his own military career thanks to an outrageous ego. But by his mid-40s, that headstrong, unwise young man had evolved into an unassailable leader chosen as the commander-in-chief of the fledgling Continental Army. By his mid-50s, he was unanimously elected the nation's first president. How did Washington emerge from the wilderness to become the central founder of the United States of America? In this remarkable new portrait, award-winning historian David O. Stewart unveils the political education that made Washington a master politician and America's most essential leader. From Virginia's House of Burgesses, where Washington learned the craft and timing of a practicing politician, to his management of local government as a justice of the Fairfax County Court, to his eventual role in the Second Continental Congress and his grueling generalship in the American Revolution, Washington perfected the art of governing and service, earned trust, and built bridges. The lessons in leadership he absorbed along the way would be invaluable during the early years of the Republic as he fought to unify the new nation. The next one is called Francis Bacon, Revelations by Mark Stevens and Annalyn Swan. This is the first comprehensive look at the life and art of Francis Bacon, one of the iconic painters of the 20th century. Francis Bacon created an indelible image of mankind in modern times and played an outsized role in both 20th century art and life, from his public emergence with his legendary triptych 1944, its images so unrelievedly awful that people fled the gallery, to his death in Madrid in 1992. Bacon was a witty free spirit and unabashed homosexual at a time when many others remained closeted, and his exploits were as unforgettable as his images. He moved among the worlds of London's Soho and East End, the literary salons of London and Paris, and the homosexual life of Tangier. Through hundreds of interviews and extensive new research, the authors probe Bacon's childhood in Ireland. He earned his father's lasting disdain because his asthma prevented him from hunting. His increasingly open homosexuality, his early design career, never before explored in detail, the formation of his vision, his early failure as an artist, his uneasy relationship with American abstract art, and his improbable late emergence onto the international stage as one of the great visionaries of the 20th century. In all, Francis Bacon Revelations gives us a more complete and nuanced and more international portrait than ever before of this singularly private, darkly funny, eruptive man and his equally eruptive, extraordinary art. Bacon was not just an influential artist, he helped remake the 20th century figure. The next one is called Last Call, a true story of love, lust, and murder in queer New York by Elon Green. The gripping true story told here for the first time of the Last Call killer and the gay community of New York City that he preyed upon. The Last Call killer preyed upon gay men in New York in the 80s and 90s and had all the hallmarks of the most notorious serial killers. Yet because of the sexuality of his victims, the sky-high murder rates, and the AIDS epidemic, his murders have been almost entirely forgotten. This gripping true crime narrative tells the story of the Last Call killer and the decades-long chase to find him. And at the same time, it paints a portrait of his victims and a vibrant community navigating threat and resilience. The next one is called Beeswing, Losing My Way and Finding My Voice, 1967 to 1975, by Richard Thompson. An intimate look at the early years of one of the world's most significant and influential guitarists and songwriters. In this moving and immersive memoir, Richard Thompson, international and longtime beloved music legend, recreates the spirit of the 1960s, where he found, and then lost, and then found his way again. Known for his brilliant songwriting, his extraordinary guitar playing, and his haunting voice, Thompson is considered one of the top 20 guitarists of all time, in the songwriting pantheon alongside Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, and Randy Newman. Now, in his long-awaited memoir, the British folk musician takes us back to the late 1960s, a period of great change and creativity, both for him and for the world at large. The next one is called Robert E. Lee and Me, A Southerner's Reckoning with the Myth of the Lost Cause, by Ty Segall. Ty Segall grew up revering Robert E. Lee. From his Southern childhood to his service in the U.S. Army, every part of his life reinforced the Lost Cause myth, that Lee was the greatest man who ever lived, and that the Confederates were underdogs who lost the Civil War with honor. Now, as a retired brigadier general and professor emeritus of history at West Point, his view has radically changed. From a soldier, a scholar, and a Southerner, Ty Segall believes that American history demands a reckoning. In a unique blend of history and reflection, Segall deconstructs the truth about the Confederacy, that its undisputed primary goal was the subjugation and enslavement of Black Americans, and directly challenges the idea of honoring those who labored to preserve that system and committed treason in their failed attempt to achieve it. Through the arc of Saijo's own life, as well as the culture that formed him, he seeks a path to understanding why the facts of the Civil War have remained buried beneath layers of myth and even outright lies, and how they embody a cultural gulf that separates millions of Americans to this day. The next one is called Festival Days by Joanne Beard. When The Fourth State of Matter, her now famous piece about a workplace massacre at the University of Iowa, was published in The New Yorker, Joanne Beard immediately became one of the most influential writers in America, forging a path for a new generation of young authors willing to combine the dexterity of fiction with the rigors of memory and reportage, and in the process, extending the range of possibility for the essay form. Now, with Festival Days, Beard brings us the culmination of her groundbreaking work. In these 9 pieces, she captures both the small, luminous moments of daily existence and those instants when life and death hang in the balance, ranging from the death of a beloved dog to a relentlessly readable account of a New York artist trapped inside a burning building, as well as 2 triumphant, celebrated pieces of short fiction. Here is an unforgettable collection destined to be embraced and debated by readers and writers, teachers, and students. Anchored by the title piece, A Searing Journey Through India that brings into focus questions of mortality and love, Festival Days presents Beard at the height of her powers, using her flawless prose to reveal all that is tender and timeless beneath the way we live now. The next one is called The Barbizon, The Hotel That Set Women Free by Paulina Bren. Welcome to New York's legendary Hotel for Women. Liberated from home and hearth by World War I, politically enfranchised and ready to work, women arrived to take their place in the dazzling new skyscrapers of Manhattan. But they didn't want to stay in uncomfortable boarding houses. They wanted what men already had: exclusive residential hotels with daily maid service, cultural programs, workout rooms, and private dining. Built in 1927 at the height of the Roaring Twenties, the Barbizon Hotel was intended as a safe haven for the modern woman seeking a career in the arts. It became the place to stay for any ambitious young woman hoping for fame and fortune. Sylvia Plath fictionalized her time there in The Bell Jar, and over the years, its almost 700 tiny rooms with matching floral curtains and bedspreads housed Titanic survivor Molly Brown, actresses Grace Kelly, Liza Minnelli, Ali MacGraw, Jacqueline Smith, Felicia Rashad, and Sybil Shepherd, writers Joan Didion, Diane Johnson, Gail Green, and Meg Wolitzer, and many more. Mademoiselle magazine boarded its summer interns there, as did Catherine Gibbs Secretarial School its students, and the Ford Modeling Agency its young models. Before the hotel's residents were household names, they were young women arriving at the Barbizon with a suitcase and a dream. Beautifully written and impeccably researched, the Barbizon weaves together a tale that has, until now, never been told. It is both a vivid portrait of the lives of these young women who came to New York looking for something more, and an epic history of women's ambition. The next one is called The Good American, The Epic Life of Bob Gersony, the U.S. government's greatest humanitarian, by Robert D. Kaplan. A sweeping yet intimate story of the most influential humanitarian you've never heard of, Bob Gersony, who spent 4 decades in crisis zones around the world. In his long career as an acclaimed journalist covering the hot moments of the Cold War and its aftermath, best-selling author Robert D. Kaplan often found himself crossing paths with Bob Gersony, a consultant for the U.S. State Department, whose quiet dedication and consequential work made a deep impression on Kaplan. Gersony, a high school dropout, later awarded a Bronze Star for his service in Vietnam, conducted on-the-ground research for the U.S. government in virtually every war and natural disaster zone in the world, in Thailand, Central and South America, Sudan, Chad, Mozambique, Rwanda, Gaza, Bosnia, North Korea, Iraq, and beyond. Gersony never flinched from entering dangerous areas that diplomats could not reach, sometimes risking his own life. Gersony's behind-the-scenes fact-finding, which included interviews with hundreds of refugees and displaced persons from each war zone and natural disaster area, often challenged the assumptions and received wisdom of the powers that be on both the left and the right. In nearly every case, his advice and recommendations made American policy at once smarter and more humane, often dramatically so. In Gersony, Kaplan saw a powerful example of how American diplomacy should be conducted. In a world that exhibits Kaplan's signature talent for combining travel and geography with sharp political analysis, the good American tells Gersony's powerful life story. And the last one, and if you stayed with me all the way to the end, bless you. The last one is called The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet by Michael E. Mann. A renowned climate scientist shows how fossil fuel companies have waged a 30-year campaign to deflect blame and responsibility and delay action on climate change, and offers a battle plan for how we can save the planet. Recycle, fly less, eat less meat. These are some of the ways that we've been told can slow climate change. But the inordinate emphasis on individual behavior is the result of a marketing campaign that has succeeded in placing the responsibility for fixing climate change squarely on the shoulder of individuals. Fossil fuel companies have followed the example of other industries deflecting blame. Think guns don't kill people, people kill people. Or greenwashing. Think of the beverage industry's crying Indian commercials of the 1970s. Meanwhile, they've blocked efforts to regulate or price carbon emissions, run PR campaigns aimed at discrediting viable alternatives, and have abdicated their responsibility in fixing the problem they've created. The result has been disastrous for our planet. In The New Climate War, Mann argues that all is not lost. He draws the battle lines between the people and the polluters, fossil fuel companies, right-wing plutocrats, and petrostates. And he outlines a plan for forcing our governments and corporations to wake up and make real change. With immensely powerful vested interests aligned in defense of the fossil fuel status quo, the societal tipping point won't happen without the active participation of citizens everywhere, aiding in the collective push forward. This book will reach, inform, and enable citizens everywhere to join this battle for our planet. Okay, there is a rather lengthy stack of nonfiction, and I promise next week's stack of fiction is just as lengthy, but then I'll be kind of caught up. I let that stack grow a little bit bigger than I wanted to. I mentioned to you that I would tell you what I'm watching now for K-dramas. I finished the one I was watching. I mentioned to you last week, and I'm drawing a blank on what I watched last week. Anyway, I'll find the title and I'll run it across the screen so you'll at least know what I was watching. And I started a new one, which is kind of an ancient history one called the Arthdal Chronicles. It's kind of a curious blend of ancient Mongolian history, think Genghis Khan times, and Game of Thrones, and it's just, I've only seen a couple episodes, and I'm interested to see how it's going to develop. It's not my normal type of thing to watch or read. I'm not a huge fantasy reader. I'm not although I loved Game of Thrones as a series, I wasn't all that thrilled with the books. I know, sacrilege. But that's what I'm watching. And then on my bike challenges, I'm doing two, as you know. I'm doing shorter ones periodically every couple of months, and then I've been doing a really long one. The really long one I'm doing is the Route 66 challenge, which goes from Chicago all the way to Los Angeles. I am in the middle of New Mexico, and I just this week passed the 60% mark, approaching Albuquerque, New Mexico. So another couple of months and I'll be finished with that really long one. The third of the shorter challenges that I've started now is the Boston to Bar Harbor challenge. It's 750 miles. It goes from Boston, Massachusetts to Bar Harbor, Maine, but it does it in a very circuitous route. I started off in Boston. It drops down into Rhode Island. I've gone all the way to the southern tip of Rhode Island, and now it's cutting across. I'm almost into Connecticut. Then it'll go across Connecticut, back up through Massachusetts. It'll hit New Hampshire and Vermont, and then it'll go into Maine and cut across to Bar Harbor. So right now I'm closing in on Mystic. That's the next milestone. So that's what my cycling's been doing. That's what I've been watching. That's what I've been reading. I'm watching a lot of soccer as the season winds down. There's a lot of excitement at the top of the English Premier League. The bottom has been settled finally. Newcastle, their recent good form has made them safe for another year, so we can do it all over again next year, since nothing's going to ever change for that club as long as Mike Ashley is the owner. We'll be a relegation candidate again next year. But anyway, I hope you've had a great week. The CDC guidance on masks for fully vaccinated people is encouraging but kind of scary. And I hope you're well and safe, and everyone around you is well and safe. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.